I'm Jeremy. Today's day 240 of reading. Today I'm reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Let's get started. I've been busy, so let's go. We're on page 191, which was concealed behind a large portrait of a fat lady in a pink silk dress. Password? She said as they approached. Balderdash, said George. A prefect downstairs told me. The portrait sunk forward to reveal a hole in the wall through which they all climbed. A crackling fire warmed the circular common room, which was full of squashy armchairs and tables. Hermione cast the merrily dancing flames a dark look, and Harry distinctly heard her mutter, "Slave labor," before bidding them good night and disappearing through the doorway to the girls' dormitory. Harry, Ron, and Neville climbed up the last spiral staircase until they reached their own dormitory, which was situated at the top of the tower. 5 four-poster beds with deep crimson hangings stood against the walls, each with its owner's trunk at the foot. Dean and Seamus were already getting into bed. Seamus had pinned his Ireland rosette to his headboard, and Dean had tacked up a poster of Victor Crumb over his bedside table. His old poster of the West Ham football team was pinned right next to it. Mental, Ron sighed, shaking his head at the completely stationary soccer players. Harry, Ron, and Hermione got into their pajamas and into bed. Harry, Ron, and Neville got into their pajamas and into bed. Someone, a house elf no doubt, had placed warming pans between the sheets. It was extremely comfortable, lying there in bed and listening to the storm raging outside. "I might go in for it, you know," Ron said sleepily through the darkness. "If Fred and George find out how to the tournament, you never know, do you?" "Suppose not." Harry rolled over in bed, a series of dazzling new pictures forming in his mind's eye. He had been hoodwinked the impartial judge into believing he was 17, and he had become the Hogwarts champion. He was standing on the grounds, his arms raised in triumph in front of the whole school, all of whom were applauding and screaming. He had just won the Triwizard Tournament. Cho's face stood out particularly clear in the blurred crowd, her face glowing with admiration. Harry grinned into his pillow, exceptionally glad that Ron couldn't see what he could. Chapter 13. Mad-Eye Moody. The storm had blown itself out by the following morning. Through the ceiling in the great hall was still gloomy. Heavy clouds of pewter gray swirled overhead as Harry, Ron, and Hermione examined their new course schedules at breakfast. A few seats along, Fred, George, and Lee Jordan were discussing magical methods of aging themselves and bluffing their way into the Triwizard Tournament. "Today's not bad, outside all morning," said Ron, who was running his finger down the Monday column of his schedule. "Herbology with the Hufflepuffs and care of magical creatures. Damn it, we're still with the Slytherins. Double divination this afternoon," Harry groaned, looking down. Divination was his least favorite subject, apart from potions. Professor Trelawney kept predicting Harry's death, which he found extremely annoying. "You should have given it up like me, shouldn't you?" said Hermione briskly, buttering herself some toast. "Then you'd be doing something sensible like arithmancy." "You're eating again, I notice," said Ron, watching Hermione adding liberal amounts of jam to her toast. "I've decided there are better ways of making a stand about elf rights," said Hermione. "Yeah, and you were just hungry," said Ron, grinning. There was a sudden rustling noise above them, and 100 owls came soaring through the open windows, carrying the morning mail. Instinctively, Harry looked up, but there was no sign of white among the mass of brown and gray. The owls circled the tables, looking for people to whom their letters and packages were addressed. A large tawny owl soared down to Neville Longbottom and deposited a parcel into his lap. Neville almost always forgot to pack something. On the other side of the hall, Draco Malfoy's eagle owl had landed on his shoulder, carrying what looked like his usual supply of sweets and cakes from home. Trying to ignore the sinking feeling of disappointment in his stomach, Harry returned to his porridge. Was it possible that something had happened to Hedwig, and that Cyrus hadn't even got his letter? His preoccupation lasted all the way across the sodden vegetable patch until they arrived in the greenhouse street. But here he was distracted by Professor Sprout showing the class the ugliest plants Harry had ever seen. Indeed, they looked less like plants than thick, black, giant slugs, protruding vertically out of the soil. Each was squirming slightly and had a number of large, shiny swellings upon it, which appeared to be full of liquid. "Bubbo tubers," Professor Sprout told them briskly. "They need squeezing. You'll collect the pus." "The what?" said Seamus Finnegan, sounding revolted. "Pus, Finnegan, pus," said Professor Sprout. "And it's extremely valuable, so don't waste it. You will collect the pus, I say, in these bottles. Wear your dragonhide gloves. It can do funny things to the skin when undiluted. Bubo tuber pus." Squeezing the bubo tubers were disgusting, but oddly satisfying as well. As each swelling was popped, a large amount of thick, yellowish-green liquid burst forth, which smelled strongly of petrol. They cut in the bottles as Professor Sprout had indicated, and by the end of the lesson had collected several pints. "This'll keep Madame Pomfrey happy," said Professor Sprout, stopping the last bottle with a cork. "An excellent remedy for the more stubborn forms of acne. Bubble tuber pus should stop students resorting to desperate measures to rid themselves of pimples. Like poor Eloise Midgen," said Hannah Abbott, a Hufflepuff in a hushed voice. She tried to curse hers off. "Silly girl," said Professor Sprout, shaking her head. But Madame Pomfrey fixed her nose back on in the end. A booming bell echoed from the castle across the wet grounds, signaling the end of the lesson, and the class separated. The Hufflepuffs climbing the stone steps for Transfiguration, and the Gryffindors heading in the other direction, down the sloping lawn, toward Hagrid's small wooden cabin, which stood on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid was standing outside the hut, one hand on the collar of his enormous black boar-hound Fang. There were several open wooden crates on the ground at his feet, and Fang was whimpering and straining at his collar, apparently keen to investigate the contents more closely. As they drew nearer, an odd rattling sound reached their ears, punctuated by what looked like minor explosions. "Mornin'," Hagrid said, grinning at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Better wait for the Slytherins. They won't want to miss this. Blessed Scroots!" "Come again?" said Ron. Hagrid pointed down into the crates. Squealed Lavender Brown, jumping backward. Just about summed up the Blessed Scroots in Harry's opinion. They looked like deformed shellless lobsters, horribly pale and slimy looking, with legs sticking out in very odd places and no visible heads. There were about 100 of them in each crate, each about 6 inches long, crawling over one another, bumping blindly into the sides of the boxes. They were giving off a very powerful smell of rotting fish. Every now and then, sparks would fly out of the ends of the Scroot, and with a small foot, it would be propelled forward several inches. "Only just hatched," said Hagrid proudly, "so you'll be able to raise them yourselves. Thought we'd make it a bit of a project of it." "And why would we want to raise them?" said a cold voice. The Slytherins had arrived. The speaker was Draco Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle were chuckling appreciatively at his words. Hagrid looked stumped at the question. "I mean, what do they do?" said Malfoy. "What is the point of them?" Hagrid opened his mouth, apparently thinking hard. There was a few seconds' pause. Then he said roughly, "That's next lesson, Malfoy. You're just feeding 'em today. Now you'll want to try 'em on a few different things. I've never had 'em before. Not sure what they'll Tomorrow we're going to read page 197.